Some people consider Norv Turner and Phillip Rivers' 2010 San Diego Chargers as one of the best teams ever to never make the playoffs. Although they had the #1 offense and defense in yards, they only posted a 9-7 record and missed the playoffs by 1 game, losing to the Chiefs for the AFC West. Granted, I won't dismiss that this is the most chargering thing the Chargers have ever chargered, say that 5 times fast, and it certainly has an argument to be considered the best team never to make the playoffs. However, I think this team has a better argument. With the NFL expanded to 16 teams in 1967, instead of 2 divisions, there were now 4 divisions, 4 teams each, leaving a window of opportunity open for Don Shula, John Unitas, Raymond Berry, and John Mackey and the Baltimore Colts to win its own division rather than having to deal with Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers. And it was so far so good for the Colts, needing a couple defensive scores to get by Atlanta, and the absolute demolitions of the Eagles and 49ers that soon followed. And 2 more defensive scores were needed for the Colts to get by Chicago in the Windy City. However, the Colts needed a late John Mackey touchdown just to secure a tie with Bud Grant's Minnesota Vikings, and a Tim Mattei touchdown in the 4th to get by Washington. Then, in the following week, against the reigning Super Bowl champion Packers, trailing 10-0 in the 4th quarter, John Unitas threw 2 touchdown passes to Alex Hawkins and Willie Richardson to secure a 13-10 comeback win. Then went to Week 9 at Atlanta and plucked the feathers of the Falcons 49-7. After smooth sailing wins against Detroit and San Francisco, they hit a roadblock facing the upstart Dallas Cowboys. They needed 2 Lou Michaels field goals and a Lenny Moore touchdown in the 4th quarter to get by Tom Landry's Cowboys 23-17, and then followed that up with an easy win over the expansion New Orleans Saints. With those 12 games being said, the Colts' record stood at 11 wins, no losses, and 1 tie. You would think with a mark like that, and being in the top 2 on offense in 9 categories, and top 2 on defense in 4 categories, and having Johnny Unitas eventually winning league MVP, that the Colts would be straight up cruising to the playoffs and possibly considered favorites to go to Super Bowl II, considering they'd beaten the Cowboys and Packers in the regular season. But that cruise hit an iceberg in the form of the Secretary of Defense. The '67 Los Angeles Rams had its own stacked roster and its own great coach, Hall of Famer George Allen, with Bernie Casey and quarterback Roman Gabriel leading the charge for a high-potent offense, and Hall of Famers Merlin Olsen and Deacon Jones leading the charge on defense. And since the Colts and Rams were division rivals at this time, they met twice. First in Week 5 when the 2 teams were only separated by a game. With both offenses and defense being in the top tier as they were in 1967, you can imagine both meetings were intense affairs. And the first meeting depicted here was a few lead changes and a very stout outings by both Roman Gabriel and Johnny Unitas. And in this game, Johnny Unitas would set the then all-time record for pass attempts by a quarterback. However, Unitas' lone interception in this game proved costly, being that it was in their own red zone, and the Rams quickly capitalized with a Bernie Casey touchdown that tied the game at 24 late in the game. Although the Colts had chances to win the game at the end, with Willie Richardson dropping what would have been a game-winning touchdown, and later Lou Michaels missing what would have been a game-winning field goal. With no overtime in the regular season in 1967, the game ended on a 24-24 tie. Following that Week 5 meeting, the Rams would keep up with the Colts, matching them result for result, all the way to Week 14, where the 2 would meet in the regular season finale at the LA Coliseum. A game where the Rams had to win in order to win the Coastal Division from the Colts. A Baltimore win, or even a second tie with the Rams, would result in the Coastal Division Championship going to Baltimore. For the Baltimore Colts, Week 14 was its worst outing, and it couldn't come at a worse time. The Rams dominated the Colts on both ends, where the Rams defense sacked Johnny Unitas 7 times and picked him off twice. Where on offense, Roman Gabriel probably had the best game of his NFL career, throwing almost as many touchdowns as he did incompletions. And because of that tie in Week 5 against the Rams earlier, the Colts would lose the tiebreaker to the Rams with this very loss. Even though the record of 11 wins, 1 loss, and 2 ties, good for a .917 winning percentage, they ultimately finished second in the Coastal Division. You would think with a record like this, even though they didn't win the division over the Rams, it's still a good enough record to make the playoffs, right? Well, I'll let a future Colts coach answer this.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs? You kidding me? Playoffs?
That's right. Despite a .917 winning percentage, the Colts failed to make the playoffs because they didn't win their division. Wildcard teams were not a thing in the NFL until the merger in 1970. Ironic that the Colts happened to win the Super Bowl that year when they first introduced that. But since there was no wildcards in 1967, despite being either first or second in 4 different defensive categories and being first or second in 9 different offensive categories, no playoffs for the Baltimore Colts in 1967. And the Rams didn't fare much better. In their divisional playoff game against the Packers, they were dominated 28-7. So despite having better records than the Cowboys and Packers, and also having beaten the Cowboys and Packers in the regular season, the Baltimore Colts were forced to watch the Cowboys and Packers play the 1967 NFL Championship in the Ice Bowl from their couch. The following year, the 68 Colts actually bounced back, posting a 13-1 mark this time, winning the division running away and dominating the NFL playoffs before, well, you know what happened in Super Bowl III. They would get their Super Bowl 2 years later in 1970. However, Don Shula was not the coach for the Colts in 1970. He was building the Miami Dolphins into an NFL power, where in 1972, he led the Dolphins to Super Bowl VII. He would meet George Allen again, where George Allen was once again trying to end Don Shula's season with his team's first loss of the year. But as most of us know, Shula vanquished Allen, and Don Shula kept the loss number at 0 at the end of the year. So why do I think the 67 Colts are the greatest team never to make the playoffs and not the 2010 Chargers? 2 reasons. 1, the Baltimore Colts have already had a past history of winning championships before this said season. Chargers didn't have that in 2010. Wasn't for lack of trying, 2006 was their best shot at it. And my main point, look at the records. When you post the highest winning percentage in North American professional sports history for a non-playoff qualifying team at .917, and that record will stand forever, in my opinion, that's case closed right there. The 1967 Baltimore Colts are the greatest team in NFL history never to make the playoffs.